I'ma snap it like I'm Harden.
Well, as far as we know, James Harden is expected to play tonight for the second time this preseason when Houston faces San Antonio. And every time we see Harden in a Rockets uniform, you've got to wonder if it'll be the last time, given his standing trade demand. So if and when Harden does leave, there'll be a lot of time to reflect on his 8 seasons with the Rockets, a process that has already begun in an ESPN.com article written by Tim McMahon. Because while James Harden has delivered in spectacular fashion on the court, McMahon reports that his behavior inside the Rockets organization has left the franchise and its star player on the verge of a breaking point.
The Houston Rockets culture in the James Harden era.
They're saying, get me the hell out of here.
This will not get better, it will get worse. You've had a great relationship, but it's over. In the NBA, when these things end, they end.
The problems for the Rockets and Harden have been magnified by what transpired with the last 2 stars the team acquired at his request. Chris Paul let Harden know he hurt his team by just standing and watching when the ball wasn't in his hands. Not coincidentally, CP3 wasn't in Houston long. Harden demanded the Rockets trade Paul for Russell Westbrook, and they did, mortgaging their draft future to make the deal. Westbrook's tenure in Houston was even shorter. Sources tell me he was appalled by the Rockets' lax culture, the tardiness to the team plane, to the bus, to film sessions that prompted a former staffer to compare the franchise to, quote, an organized AAU team. Westbrook got his wish to be traded.
Russell Westbrook doesn't want to play with James Harden. James Harden doesn't want to play with Russell Westbrook. The mentality of James Harden is that, all right, so be it.
Russell Westbrook wanted to be in Washington, and finally they got that deal done.
An ex-Rockets assistant coach put the situation with Harden this way. Quote, you can't get mad at your kid if you let him eat candy every night, and then suddenly one night you don't, and they throw a tantrum. You're the one who let them eat candy every night. The Rockets turned the organization over to James, and now they have to live with the fallout. That likely means living with an unhappy Harden until the Rockets can find fair trade value for one of the NBA's best players. On the Rockets, I'm Tim McMahon, ESPN.
Again, a fascinating, detailed article by Tim McMahon. Just how good has Harden been over the last 3 seasons? Well, he's won each of the last 3 scoring titles, joining Kevin Durant, Michael Jordan, and George Gervin as the only player since the merger to lead the league in scoring in 3 straight seasons. His talent, it's undeniable. But as far as how he's handling things, that's what's in question. Charles Barkley today joined Keyshawn, J. Will, and Zubin on ESPN Radio, and he was asked what he would say to James Harden.
Yo, man, we gonna get rid of you. We just trying to get as much as we can. Listen, that article was devastating. There's probably only 4 or 5 players who I've ever played against or been watching for the last 30 years should have some type of power. Let's be realistic. You talk about number one guys who are, this guy, they say he's always late, which that's like my number one pet peeve. You got to be on time, because if you're late 1 time or 2 times, that's all right. But if you're late all the time, you just said, I don't care about the players, I don't care about the coach, I'm just going to do it my way. But when you talk about trading players, like, that's amazing to have that type of power.
Future. In the last hour, Adrian Wojnarowski and Ramona Shelburne are reporting that the Rockets are expanding trade talks on James Harden beyond the Nets and the Sixers. His 2 choices. The Rockets open up their season next Wednesday against the Thunder. As of right now, Harden on the team, scheduled to play for the squad. Let's bring in Adrian Wojnarowski with much more on this story. Woj, what has changed in the last few days surrounding this situation in Harden?
Hey, Kevin, more dialogue with more teams. Houston has become engaged, I'm told, with teams in both the Eastern and Western conferences. And I think there's becoming more of a comfort level among teams in the league to get involved in these James Harden talks to offer up significant assets, young players, all-star level players, draft picks, combinations of all that. Without, number one, a promise that James Harden will re-sign with you in 2 years when he can become a free agent. They're working in concert with Harden on this. He's aware of a lot of these scenarios. And I think teams are seeing more, there's a little more of a confidence out there that the potential deal of Harden may not be Philadelphia or the Brooklyn Nets.
Okay, you mentioned Philadelphia. In your report, you talk about the Sixers' willingness to include Ben Simmons in a potential trade. What more are you hearing about this?
Kevin, the Sixers have signaled a willingness in these talks to include Simmons in deals that include Harden, but likely would need to include a lot more. They haven't really gotten traction, Philadelphia and Houston, on a Harden deal. They have talked, and they've talked about a number of scenarios. And among them, Ben Simmons has been brought up. But right now, Philadelphia is reluctant to break up that Embiid-Simmons partnership without a massive haul back. And I think in their minds, perhaps even more than James Harden. But these are negotiations. The NBA just announced tonight the trade deadline is set now for March 25th. Not sure it's going to go that long. Houston, listen, they would like to get a deal done if they can find the right deal and move on from this. But they have a package, a threshold that they want to reach, and they're going to keep moving toward that. But there has been more conversation with more teams here in the last few days.
All right, good note there. March 25th, the trade deadline this upcoming season for the NBA. We will monitor this developing story surrounding James Harden as the season opener for the league is 5 days away. Woj, appreciate the time.
Rockets staffers. And look, none of this is a big shock, right? A former Rockets assistant coach said of Harden, quote, "We knew who the boss of the organization was. That's just part of the deal was when you go to Houston. The players, coaches, GM, owner all know." The same assistant also said, quote, "I don't blame James. I blame the organization. It's not his fault. He did what they allowed him to do." A member of last season's coaching staff added this: "If they have multiple days off, everybody knows James is going to fly somewhere else and party. But he's then going to come back and have a 50-point triple-double, so they're okay with it." Perk, we know superstars in this league granted a certain amount of leeway, but how much is too much for an organization to allow?
Well, here's the thing, Rachel, is that James Harden is grown. Last time I checked, he's a grown man. So just because they gave him, those type of superstar privileges, that don't mean it was the Rockets' fault. This is done all around the league where superstars get privileges. It's James' fault that he abuses the privileges and goes above and beyond. What was the Rockets supposed to do? Fine them, suspend them? He's the guy that's been leading the league in scoring for the last 3 years, an MVP candidate, a guy who's was almost close to averaging a triple-double. James Harden, what do ownership or the front office is supposed to tell James? Don't do this, we're going to fine you, and he's coming back and delivering on the court. James has to be to blame for this.
Perk, you played on a lot of different teams with a lot of different stars. Is what James Harden was asking for that much different than what other stars around the league get away with on a regular basis?
Well, I'll repeat your question again, Nick. I'm sorry.
Is what Harden was asking for and what he was doing in Houston, is that much different than what all kinds of stars around the league do on a regular basis?
No, it's not that much difference. I know a lot of stars that ask for, certain players or ask for certain demands in the organization. Right now, we just started off showing Kawhi Leonard. Last time I checked, he's taking a helicopter to San Diego every day after practice. He's late for team playing. So, it comes with being a $100 million player.
I think that's the key, though, and you said it earlier, Perk. It's what you do with those privileges, right?
Yes.
Because it is a back and forth. And by the way, James Harden is far from the first person to be in this situation. Let's go back to the Jordan rules and Michael Jordan, right? Or on this show when Grant Hill came on with Tracy McGrady and had to inform him of the dinner he had been at with Tim Duncan and Doc Rivers when they were both playing in Orlando, where Tim asked if his fiancée, now wife, could come on the team plane, and Doc, trying to hold the line on special privileges, said no. And Tim Duncan didn't end up in Orlando with those guys. And T-Mac and Grant were just out of their head years later that it didn't happen. They were like, let her on the damn plane. So obviously we have seen this for decades. The issue, though, is what you do with those superstar privileges and how each player who gets them uses his judgment on whether it hurts or helps the team. And by the way, it's a sliding scale, and there's a lot of wiggle room there. But a great example in Tim McMahon's story was Russell Westbrook, who had those same exact privileges, right, in Oklahoma City. That entire organization was built around him. But being built around Russ means that you were built around his need for everything to be organized, everything to be on time. Russ loves things a very particular, certain, steady way. So that was actually good for the organization. Well, he then got to Houston, and it was the opposite with James Harden. Tim McMahon details the late planes, late practices, and that was one of the reasons that Russ wanted a trade. So it is a sliding scale. It happens in every team across the years, but it didn't work out in Houston, and they are bearing the fruit of that now. All right, guys, before we go to break, I do want to take a quick second to mention that today, the NBA Foundation announced a total of $2 million in inaugural grants that will drive economic empowerment in Black communities through employment and career advancement.